we do see today that especially after the murder of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated just after he had uttered a word about black on black violence, and you know, sort of he made it his mission to talk about black on black violence, you know, forgetting that there is white on white violence, you know, in America, and there is white on black violence in the world. So he made his mission to talk about gangs, fatherlessness in the black community, and how blacks are just killing each other, you know, their problems are cultural and they are not taking accountability, they are not responsible, they are violent, you know. And we are seeing a lot of these conservative white racist with their black friends who are also black conservative, feeding upon these talking points and demonizing, you know, the black community. So, you know, people would talk about blacks being blacks having a violent culture, and those ideas are then pushed across the world, and these fears of, you know, a violent black culture begins to take root, you know, among the various society in Europe, in Asia, everywhere, you know, and Latin America, and Southern America. You know, the blacks are just violent people. Even here in South Africa, you know, you do have groups such as the AfriForum who are trying to import some of these cultural wars that are currently happening in the West to South Africa, and they are beginning to tap into these talking points, talking about blacks being a violent people. You know, they like to talk about Shaka, who destabilized the region and he killed people. They even make up a number that he killed 2 million people and displaced many. You know, these blacks were just violent. And this type of, you know, talking points, you know, they are rising. And these racists, because of, you know, with the mega movement, which is trying to reassert white dominance in the world, these guys have become bold, and they are expressing themselves, and they want big platforms. In fact, in America, they've already, you know, been successful in that. So they are trying in other places, especially here in South Africa. So they are going to try to recruit many of these black South Africans to then, you know, talk about these white supremacist talking points. And most of these people are going to be recruited within the Christian church. You already, you know, already up in discussions with some of these blacks who are within this conservative, who like to point out the fact that, you know, blacks are a violent culture. You know, there were people who were even saying that apartheid was better. I'm just glad that many blacks in the last elections in South Africa did not vote based on that type of thinking and nonsense. So you then had this type of, you know, blacks who are, you know, giving themselves over to white supremacist talking point in South Africa. We saw them, especially with the apartheid was better type of people. And then there were those who when they talk about black violence, they like to point at the fact that the Nkatha ANC wars, which they call them black on black violence, which in fact they were, but they forget that the Satan behind the wars were the National Party, which funded the Inkatha Freedom Party. They trained and armed many of these Inkatha goons, and were working with them when they went into townships such as your Sebokeng, where they murdered people. So, and they also forget that it was the black government black leaders who put an end to the war and created a reconciliation between the Inkatha and the ANC. And some would like to call this was a tribalistic war. It was not a tribalistic war, because many people who suffered in this violence were largely Zulu people, and Inkatha, we know that they claim that they were promoting Zulu nationalism, and many Zulu people fought against Inkatha, and as were many other people fighting against Inkatha. And some other thing, people, when talking about the black government in ANC, since like it is a black government, have become very violent. In apartheid, it was not like this. Do people really, check the stats? During the apartheid time, especially in 1993-4, we reach the highest levels of violent crimes in South Africa. And since the 1900s, the stats are pointing that violent crimes had been increasing, and in 1993-1994 it reached that peak. And then when the ANC took over, it now is declining. So in terms of violent crimes in South Africa, we are better under the ANC leadership. So people should not just, be talking and assuming stuff. So we're better now, under the black government, since they want to talk, like that. And also, moreover, this thing of, Europeans talking about there being violent cultures, especially black violent cultures, I just don't understand. These are people who are not self-aware. People who like to talk, they are not self-aware, and they do not know their own history, or they simply, pretend to not know their own history. They have this agenda of presenting themselves as these good people who helped everyone else in the world. The most violent culture, when we want to talk about violence, the most violent culture is European culture. European culture is the most violent culture in human history. It is the most violent culture in human history. The culture has spread the most violence across the world. What you call European culture or white culture. It has spread the most violent across the world. In terms of violence, what they term, black culture, black cultural violence, is nothing when you try to compare it with European culture. Now, since we are in the Protestant month, or what they call, the Reformation month, in Luther 1517 nailing the 1995 thesis in Wittenberg Door, and therefore started the Protestant Reformation, which changed the face of Europe and all of that stuff. So 1517, in 1618 to 1648, there is what we call in Europe the 30-year wars. The 30-year wars in Europe were religious wars between the Catholics and the Protestant. That was a fight for, so-called religious conviction. It spilled over to a political conflict, and then it ended up being, a desire for continental dominance in Europe between Catholics and Protestant. Millions of people died. Millions of people died, leaving some running away from Europe. You do then have, these Europeans fleeing away, going to the Americas, going to other places, because they were fleeing persecution, they were fleeing wars, they were fleeing starvation. That's what's happening in Europe. Europeans killing each other in millions. Just about 50 years after the 30-year war, we had the War of Spanish Succession, which lasted 15 years. Guess what? Millions of people died. Millions of people died. And in 1792 to 1802, we had the famous French Revolution, which I simply view it as a capitalist takeover. Remember, in Europe, you had the feudal system, which had ruled Europe, presided over by the church, the Catholic Church, and had ruled Europe since the beginning of the Dark Ages. And this feudal system was then replaced by the capitalist system. So with the French Revolution, I view it as a capitalist takeover, because since from there the feudal system died out and capitalism replaced it and gave us what we have in the modern world. So the French Revolution in 1792 going to 1802, the early it created chaos in Europe. Millions of people died. Millions of people died. Europeans killing each other. Europeans, at this time, in the African continent, you have nothing close to what was currently happening in Europe. You have nothing close to that. Yes, there were wars, but in terms of the number of deaths, the continuous killing, starving, destruction of people, like it was worse in Europe. Just after the French Revolution had ended, in a year, it ended in 1802. In 1803, going to 1815, you then had the Napoleonic Wars, where now there was this chaos, and then Napoleon comes up, and then he decides that, okay, I'm going to bring order here. And then you had the Napoleonic Wars, which saw millions of people. It even the wars even went to the northern part of Africa in Egypt. So millions of people died, and millions of people were displaced, fleeing Europe. And now Europe, to some extent, is at a negative birth rate as a result of this war, as a result of this violence. You see, and just after the so-called Napoleonic War, which ushered Europe into anarchy and all sorts of things, there were other wars, and then all of a sudden in 1914 to 1918, you have World War I. 1939 to 1945, you have World War II, and from 1914 to 1945, World War I, World War II, European powers fighting. And obviously some Asian powers also were involved. How many people died just in 1914 to 1945? Less than 40 years. How many people died? Now it is estimated that the number has reached 100 million. War started by the European capitalists who were seeking more wealth, seeking more power, seeking more markets. They were behind the funding of the Nazis. They were behind the communist, which they pretend to hate, and they were behind the capitalists of, Europe, America, creating this chaos, and therefore ushering the world into destruction. Close to 100 million people die in less than 40 years, between 1914 to 1945. That's the violent culture that you find in Europe and in the West. I'm not even going to talk about the wars of imperialism, the wars of colonialism, the wars that they fought in the Middle East, the wars that they fought in Asia, the wars that they fought in, in Far Asia, the wars that they fought in Korea, the wars that they fought with Afghanistan, Iraq, and European white culture is a violent culture. Even today, who is currently behind Israel? Who is arming Israel with, billions? Who is arming the Ukrainians, where close to 1 million people have died between the war between Ukraine and Russia? Why? Because NATO, even breaking the agreements that were made after World War II, of not extending its influence near Russian borders. They decided to do that, and now look, what we are currently having now is close to 1 million people dying between the war in Ukraine and Russia. Brothers, made to fight by foreigners from far away. Israel, funded by America, destabilizing that whole region in the Middle East, used as an American proxy, in the domination of that Middle East region, which is rich in oil and in other mineral resources. So Europeans can't tell us about violence. They are the most violent people. The European culture is violent. So people better not try to paint black people as if we are these monsters. We are these things, that crawls out from the underground, coming to swallow everyone in this world. This is how Charlie Kirk tried to paint black people, as if we are these people who are not responsible. How about the fact that Europeans have killed more people in this world than any other ethnic group? I'm not going to talk about wars that they fought via diseases. So everyone needs to take accountability, and people should stop trying to paint black people as if we are the most evil, people. Remember, we're also regarded as, descendant from Satan here in South Africa by the racist reform circles. That was in their theology. We are those people who, because of the color of our skin, we have the mark of Cain, as they will say, some of them. We are the cursed people. We have had to fight to regain our image as a result of being brutalized and dehumanized by those racist right-wingers who are hiding under the name of Christian. Now, Charlie Kirk was one of the most vocal of those people, and now you do have people who are coming after him, repeating this myth. Europeans can never tell anyone about violence. I hope this video changes your mind, and if you have comments, critiques, do share them with us. Thank you very much. God bless you.